Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to this Let's Meet, the last of the year. We've had a very exciting set of Let's Meets this year. Obviously, the year has really thrown a lot of spotlight on the activities within the gas sector. And indeed, we've looked at many different elements of it. But today, we're going to look at the impacts that we're seeing from the conflict in Ukraine and Russia's war of aggression on European consumers. We know that we've had unprecedented price increases that are indeed related to that conflict. And it has been a huge challenge for vulnerable consumers, but not just vulnerable consumers, increasingly also those that are more affluent. And this is something that we have taken a lot of interest in Eurogas, and of course are very concerned to see how we can best support consumers going forward. Well, we're very lucky today to have a real expert panel that will discuss this issue with me. And indeed, to go first today, and we're very happy to have her, we have Paula Pinho, who is indeed the director in DG ENER, who is responsible for the just transition, consumers, energy efficiency and innovation. Indeed, Paula will be outlining some of the activities that have been undertaken by the European Commission to try and address the needs of consumers in this unprecedented situation of high energy prices. I think that we can also say that Paula knows that the European Commission have been very active. We know about in October 2021, of course, there was the consumer toolbox that was brought out to help consumers and to encourage member states to find the right way to manage the situation. That was indeed before the war began. And I'm sure that all of us, myself included, are keen to hear from Paula to understand how the European Commission is seeing the development of the next step of measures that need to be taken, especially as we are heading into a winter. And at the moment, looking out the window here in Brussels, what is a very cold and frosty December morning. Paula, very glad to have you with us. I wonder if you could turn your camera on and join. Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, that's wonderful. If indeed, we'd be very grateful if you would be able to outline how you see the current situation and what activities you think are necessary and what has already been done. I would also remind the audience, because it's very great to have you with us today, if you'd like to ask questions, please do use the question box at the bottom of the screen, the Q&A box, I should say, and I will be able to read those questions and pick questions to ask to Paula. Paula will have to leave almost directly after her intervention because she has to rush off to another important meeting. So we're lucky that she is with us here this morning. But if you want to get a question to Paula, please ask now. Paula, good morning. Great to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, James. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. Really a pleasure to be here with you. You've already set the scene. What a year! What a year! I can only say. And as you said, the energy crisis that we saw looming actually started already a year ago, in a way as a result of the post-COVID recovery globally. But then, of course, worsened, radically worsened by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And despite an extremely difficult situation, we've seen now a major drop in Russian energy supplies. If we think that last year, Russian gas still counted for 45% of our gas imports, and we're now down to 7%. And much of it was against our will at the beginning, but fair to say that in the meantime, we've taken really also very clear measures to reduce that dependence on Russian gas imports. We've managed to find alternative supplies and to reduce our demand considerably. Now, we've been taking decisive measures over the past year to help the EU citizens, to help the EU business to overcome the crisis. And if I can structure it, these actions have been articulated along four main pillars, which are divided between the short, actually the immediate, and then the medium and the long term. On the one hand, we continue to pursue into the direction of making the European Green Deal a reality, but we have scaled up, we have speeded up. We are discussing energy efficiency, renewables as the ultimate and structural solutions also to the current crisis of the fossil fuels. And here, you know, there are still negotiations going on with the European Parliament, with the Council. That's one. The second, we've put now even more emphasis on diversifying our supply routes and sources, in particular of fossil fuels, and in the short term to limit our dependence on Russia. Third axis, we're strengthening our security of supply, and this is something that needs to be done imminently, has been done over the past year to already face last winter and now to face the coming winter. And as we speak, we're already preparing actually for the next winter 23-24. And last, and definitely not least, we have been taking measures to address the energy prices and enhance affordability for consumers, and really trying to help consumers in this unprecedented times where energy prices have hit levels that we had never ever seen. So much so, and this we could see already last year when energy prices started to go up, our fear, unfortunately confirmed, is it's not only about energy. We are now really in a cost of living crisis, because everything that affects the energy and the prices of energy has then rippling effects all across the society. And our work is to protect households in need, in particular those most vulnerable. But as you also said, James, these are no longer only low-income households who need our assistance. We see that more and more middle-income households are increasingly facing difficulties when paying their bills, be it for energy, be it for accommodation, be it food. So basically the basic needs. So we've started last year already in October with putting forward a wide toolbox of measures that member states had at their disposal to help consumers. And this has been made very good use of, with income support, with energy vouchers, with rebates on bills, and financial support to invest in more structural changes in energy efficiency and renewable. Now, we've been over the year working on expanding such toolbox as much as we could, while respecting national specificities, including social policies that member states apply in this area. And at the same time, we also expanded member states' abilities to raise the revenues with legislation aimed at limiting excess revenues in the energy sector, and I'll come back to that. Now, at the same time, we need to make sure that such measures are well targeted and do not remove the incentive to save energy. Now, you may say, and it's true, at such levels of prices, there's clearly an incentive to save energy. And even if we reduce that price, there will still be an incentive. But there's a limit to that. So we need to always, if we provide support, always combine it with an incentive to reduce demand wherever there is such possibility. Obviously, if we're talking about the most vulnerable, the poorest in society, they cannot afford to further reduce their consumption, and that's not where we can still have gains in terms of energy reduction. This is the short term. At the same time, we need in parallel to improve energy efficiency of the homes, to gradually replace fossil fuels with renewable energy. And those are the structural measures that we continue to work on in parallel. If I now present you with more detail these measures that I've just mentioned, as said, on the one hand, we put forward legislation to reduce demand of gas. At the same time, we then proposed measures to reduce electricity demand, and at the same time, in the same package, measures aimed at redistributing the surplus revenues in the energy sector to final customers. And this is pretty unprecedented, as so many other measures that have been taken over the past year, which were really a first in the EU energy history. For the first time, we're really asking that inframarginal electricity producers who have been making exceptional profits as the high gas prices have driven up the electricity price, that these surplus revenues would need to be redistributed. So whenever there is a revenue above 180 euro per megawatt of electricity produced from those inframarginal technologies, those revenues should be redistributed. And what can member states do with these? They can precisely compensate customers for reducing their consumption. They can use it as direct transfers to customers. They can lower the electricity costs of customers for limited volumes, or indeed promote investments by customers into more structural measures promoting, for instance, energy efficiency, insulation of the houses they live. In parallel, we proposed and enabled, this has already been adopted by the Council, a solidarity contribution from fossil fuel companies. The logic is the same. There have been very, very high revenues in 2022. So the idea is that some of these surpluses can be redistributed. So as said, pretty unprecedented. Had you asked me a year ago whether we could have ever gone down this way, and with the support of all member states, I would have thought that this is extremely unlikely. But we are in unprecedented times, and therefore also having unprecedented measures. Now, as we speak, and still focusing on the months to come, I'm very, very pleased that we again have been able to achieve something unprecedented. Just this Monday, this week, and James knows this very well as BEUC, who's also here represented, we have, together with several stakeholders in the energy industry, consumer organizations, distributors and regulators. So we had BEUC, we had SEER, Euroelectric, Eurogas, the EU DSO, the retailers, the European retailers, and the EDSO. We came together to agree on joint common principles on enhanced consumer protection this winter. This had never been done, but there was a clear sense of the need to come all together and each stakeholder do what is at their reach to facilitate the difficult conditions under which consumers of energy find themselves today. And this is really an unprecedented effort. We've issued this declaration in the presence of Commissioner Simpson and Commissioner Reinders. It is a follow-up to the European Council conclusions from October 2022, where there was a call to do more for consumers as we go into the winter. It is a result of intensive discussions among these stakeholders, because of course everyone comes from their different angles and with facing their own challenges. But I'm very pleased that with this declaration, suppliers, distributors, regulators, and consumer organizations are encouraged to implement additional voluntary consumer protection measures, which go beyond the existing legislation until at least end of March 2023. This is to say, we're seeing there an agreement in principle to look at the possibility for bill deferrals, the establishment of payment plans, preventing as much as possible disconnections, careful use of unilateral contract changes, and really a big emphasis on providing clear information to consumers. And when implementing these concrete measures, all these stakeholders should be guided by the joint principles, that is to say, to act in solidarity with all people in need, to offer a holistic but targeted approach to consumer challenges, while at the same time avoiding excessive risks for energy suppliers. There are different suppliers, some are also SMEs, and with a clear support to demand reduction measures. These stakeholders are now communicating the declaration to their members, will take stock of its implementation and the good practices that the declaration triggered, and will do so by the end of February and April. And I would really like to thank Eurogas, as well as all the other stakeholders involved, for their constructive approach in building this important initiative, for us to be able to agree on a common ground for additional consumer protection measures as we go into this winter, and which build on some already very good practices across the EU. And really, if as a result of this declaration, and be it 1,000 people across the EU avoid or are prevented from being cut off of their energy supply, it's already worth it. But I do hope that it will have much bigger impact at a moment where indeed we all need to do our share to facilitate the situation in which consumers find themselves. Thank you very much, and happy to still answer a question if you wish.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Paula. That was very comprehensive. And indeed, there has been a lot of activity since that October 2021 toolbox. And I can say from Eurogas' point of view, we're very happy that you had your hand on the rudder of the boat relating to that statement that was released on Monday, as you've just described. Because I think you working with the Commission made that process smoother, and we were able to keep a lot of different interests together, which I think was important. In a way, I think this title of this Let's Meet is, are we doing enough to protect consumers? I would take from what you say that we've done unprecedented things so that you feel that we are in a much better place to deal with the winter. I just wonder whether or not you think that what we're doing now, we will have to revisit again in 6 months. You began at the beginning with a more broad overview of all the activities that we're doing: energy efficiency, reducing demand, strengthening security of supply. Do you foresee this crisis running on? Will we have to look again at the measures for consumers? Or do you think that the measures that we put in place in totality will actually help us, that we won't have to continue this kind of emergency behavior? How do you see it, Paula?
Thank you, James. And it's important, of course, nobody can predict what will happen, but we are rather preparing for a situation to endure, unfortunately, than believing that this will be all done and solved next winter. So as I said, we're actually already putting a lot of emphasis in the winter 2023-24. We also need to recall that many of the measures that I referred to were emergency measures with a very limited duration, most of them with a duration of 1 year with a review clause. So the need to really revisit. So when we speak of demand reduction, for instance, it's already clear that we'll probably need to prolong the efforts from member states to reduce demand, hopefully always in an efficient manner. It shouldn't be about demand destruction. It should be about really positive demand reduction. But I'd say would rather prepare to prolong at least some of the measures that we put in place than to believe that we will be all good in a year's time.
Yeah, I think that probably makes sense. I think in fairness, we see it the same way. We have to continue preparing, and being prepared is the best way to deal with probably a situation that will endure. I think there are two questions that come in, one which is actually very related to the topics, and one which is more slightly related, but indeed it's about renewable energy, so I will ask it anyway. They're both from Diana Powers, so thank you to Diana. So how have the energy companies responded, in your opinion, to, I mean, it is unprecedented, the inframarginal caps. In Eurogas, of course, we came to the point of view that we could understand as emergency measures that these tools would be necessary in a short term, if you like, as a measure, as we said, as emergency. How have you seen the general response from industry to this? Are they, I mean, it's hard to imagine. Are they welcoming it? We see, of course, in the press, some organizations who are very opposed to them and concerned about investments in renewables. How are you seeing the general response to this?
Yeah. So we'll have the first, that member states had also some time to implement these. So it will start to come. We'll see practical results hopefully as of early next year. As said, a year ago, or more than a year ago, this would have been unthinkable, right? But I think across the board, and starting with the member states themselves, we've seen and everybody realized that we all need to do our share. There's nobody who can be really left untouched and without contributing. And I think, and even though obviously this is not a measure that energy companies love and cheer, but at the same time they also recognize in general that it is their way of also making a contribution to those who are much more affected and have less leeway to deal with the situation, like we mentioned, consumers and vulnerable consumers, and the scope of consumers affected really by the energy bills and having real difficulties in paying them is increasing. So I think there was a clear sense that everybody needs to do its share, even if under normal circumstances these would have been indeed unthinkable measures.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paula. That's good and clear. The other question actually relates to the sort of deployments of renewables, and particularly talking about biogas. But in essence, yeah, you talked about diversification of supply as a method also to secure our supply. Are you seeing any specific points, say, around the 35 billion cubic meter target that has been put forward? May not really be your department. Just out of interest, Paula, do you have any views on this? Are we encouraging the agricultural community to help with the gas crisis? How do you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you've seen that as a response to the start of the war in Ukraine, the Commission has put forward the so-called Repower EU, which really speeded up and increased the ambition in terms of deployment of renewables, but also of energy efficiency. And among those has also put forward very clear targets, notably for biogas. So clearly, yes, we do expect, as I said, and not just an increase of ambition, but also an acceleration. And yes, to the extent that the agriculture community can contribute to this increase of deployment of biogas, where there have been set quite ambitious targets, we definitely count on that. As we speak, we're negotiating the renewables directive as part still of the Fit for 55. These are things that are being brought up there, and where again, the majority agrees that we need to really increase and speed up.
Yeah, no, indeed. And thanks for that, Paula. And I can honestly say in Eurogas, you fully support the 35 billion cubic meter target, and also to support the agricultural communities to deliver on it. Paula, I know you have to go and catch a train, so I'm going to say thank you very much for coming and giving your very good comprehensive overview of what is being done to help consumers. We will have to see after the winter, as you said, we have a sort of duty, if you will, also to report on what our members have been doing by February. So I'm sure we will continue to work together to assess what is being done for consumers and whether or not we need to do more. For the time being, thanks very much. Good luck with your meetings today, and we wish you a safe trip. And thanks again for joining us for this, the last Let's Meet of 2022. We hope to see you again in 2023. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you. And everyone, a healthy, good time. Bye. See you next year.
See you next year. Thanks, Paula. I would like to invite Aurélie Beauvais, indeed the Managing Director of Euroheat and Power, the organization that is representing district heating, district cooling in Europe, to come forward. One of the things that I think we will find interesting is that indeed you are representing a lot of consumers, tremendous amount of consumers. I think there's a lot of focus on sort of individual households and certainly the electricity consumers. And somehow I think the district heating and cooling consumers are somehow overlooked in the big debate. And that's why I thought it was very important today to invite you to come forward and talk about the experience of your consumers, what is being done for them, and yeah, the rights that they have. And I think Aurélie would be very happy to hear how you see the role of district heating and cooling in relation to the crisis and how it's going to go for the future. Aurélie, welcome. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, James. Thank you indeed for inviting us. The funny thing about district heating and cooling is also that indeed it was also born out of an energy crisis. The oil supply shock back in the 70s was actually the trigger to the development of our technology in the markets where it is today most developed, which is mostly in the Nordic area. And yes, I think in the current debate, it is very important to talk more about the contribution of heating and cooling networks to protect European consumers. I want to take the time also to congratulate you, as well as our colleagues from BEUC and others that joined together this declaration, because I do agree. I think those measures which have been brought forward are necessary. They are good measures to build on, because as it was recalled by Paula, I think that the social crisis that we are going through is immense. It's profound. It is reaching several layers of society, and it is becoming a systemic crisis. So it's very serious. And on the other hand, maybe being a bit provocative here, I think we should also admit that energy precarity isn't new. And today, what is driving what is, as you said, an unprecedented crisis, and which was also unforeseen in many aspects, is another supply shock with the very drastic shortage of fossil fuel imports. On the other hand, and more generally, what has been driving energy poverty before that has been highly inefficient homes and the persistent, very strong persistence of fossil-based heating in most of our building stock, which means still buildings that are using far more energy than they should, and with sources that are not only more polluting, but also much more exposed to global price shocks. And this is what we are seeing today. And as it was highlighted, I think by Paula Pinho very rightly, is that there is still kind of a sweet paradox between those emergency measures, which are absolutely needed today to maintain, in a way, the European unity, and the REPowerEU objectives and the Fit for 55 objectives, which will be in the long run the only way to protect our consumers effectively, and which is about making our building more efficient, making our energy system more efficient, and rolling out as fast as we can clean and local heating solutions. Because we need to give the means to our citizens, probably very fast now, to not be exposed to such crisis in the future. And as it was highlighted, we do not think that this crisis will last a year. It will probably be longer than that. So it is also time to take a more concrete action at European and national level. And although a lot of things in the Fit for 55 that were already highlighted before are good, we can definitely do more. When we come back to the heating and cooling sector, it's true that we are speaking from a particular position in this debate, because it's true that the impact, the surge on energy prices that we have seen was not necessarily that strong for heating and cooling consumers. It has been far lower than in other sectors, and this is why in countries where heating and cooling networks are very developed, like I said, in the Denmark or in the Nordic countries, we see a stampede from consumers to district heating systems. There are requests for connection that are enormous, press coverage that is huge in those countries, pointing out the benefits of those heating and cooling networks, once again, to face this supply shock crisis. And why? Because indeed, another way to protect our consumers in the longer run is to build systems that are efficient, local, and clean. And efficient because we don't say it enough, I think, in the current context, we are facing times of scarcity. And we're not only facing times of scarcity because we have a supply shortage now, we're facing time of scarcity because we are going to reduce fossil fuels in general for the long run. And we will need to replace this energy, which today is a huge part of our mix. We need diversified and local systems because we're facing times of uncertainty. And clean, I hope I don't need to explain. Sorry, I think the sore throat is gaining all of us. So we do need to complement emergency measures that are passive today with emergency measures that are active. And in this regard, sorry, once again, always has to happen at the right moment. So in this regard, some ideas for the debate. We're thinking of heat planning assessment, definitely, at European level, which will be critical to be able to harvest local clean heat sources, which are far less volatile. And we're talking here about renewable heat, so geothermal, solar thermal, but also, as it was pointed out, bioenergy and biomethane, for which countries which are today very reliant on gas are betting a lot, like in Czech Republic or Poland, and recovered heat, sewage, metro, anything that can help us basically replace fossil fuel in the system. We need also to develop heat network and phase out individual heating solution, in particular gas boilers for us are today too inefficient. And when it comes to using gas, and I think we need to agree, we will be using gas in the system still for the next decade and more, because it will not be that easy to replace. We think that using it in a heating and cooling network is already a very efficient way to do it. It is a way to protect consumers because you save about 30% of gas when you use it in a heat network compared to individual solutions. So heat planning assessment, phase out of gas boilers, using dedicated incentives to have those investments for clean heating solutions happening on the ground. Paula, Pinho mentioned, of course, again, all those objectives we have in the package, but the truth is that renovations, energy efficiency, concrete investment from the consumer side in clean heating technologies are not happening, because it is still too expensive. So we do need maybe to have a more active approach to financial support for consumers. The program Green for Savings in Czech Republic, for example, which combines isolation with financial top-up for solar rooftops, could be replicated to a financial top-up to connecting to heating and cooling networks, or financial top-up to install a heat pump where it's relevant, for example. So the last element, which we think will be very important to put in place in this debate, and that should be considered as an emergency measure, is really to start planifying the way we heat our buildings at local level in a much more stringent way. So that includes, for example, mandatory connection requirements to district heating and cooling networks wherever possible, wherever they are existing. That's already what we see happening in a lot of countries, including, for example, the Netherlands, which is gas reliant, yes, but decided to use it in the most efficient way through heating and cooling networks, and at the same time phasing in cleaner sources. And we need to make sure that wherever we have local sustainable heat sources available, whether it is biogas, biomethane, geothermal, solar thermal, we use it. Because whatever is local is going to be better for the resilience of our consumers in the future. And I think it's also important in times of scarcity to ask ourselves, why should we or would we, for example, electrify or create an additional electricity demand in a building which can be heated with another sustainable non-electric heat sources? And I think that has to be put in the debate today, because the times are very serious. So that would be my contribution for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aurélie. I think that was indeed, again, very comprehensive and highlighting the important role that indeed district heating and cooling will play as we move forward. And I think it was interesting to say the increasing demand that you're getting for consumers to engage. I have a follow-up question. We haven't got any questions yet from the audience. Audience, please feel free to ask questions. I always ask them. My view, though, is that, and I'm interested in this, we see a lot in REPowerEU that talk about specific technologies for heating, developments of different types of fuels, mentioned biogas as well. Do you feel there's enough of a focus in REPowerEU on district heating and cooling? Are there specific elements under that are actually being brought forward? Are the consumers of district heating and cooling being focused through the toolbox? How are you seeing it? Do you feel there's somehow a bit of a blind spot, or is there enough being done for your consumers and your networks through the REPowerEU?
No, absolutely not. Indeed, thank you for asking this question. I think if we look at the REPowerEU, the objective is to accelerate the phase out of fossil fuels in heating, so with a specific focus on buildings in the next 5 years. And if we look at the European level, we know that, for example, when we look at the building heating mix, electricity is about 5.8% of this building heating mix. Heating networks are about 11%, and all the rest is also fossil fuels. And when I look at the REPowerEU, I see very good measures for the development of solar and wind. And I see gigantic measures for the uptake of renewable hydrogen, which is always pointed out as a different source, but that is at the end solar and wind. So we are developing a lot of new renewable capacity, which are today kind of a dwarf in building heating when you take the European perspective. And most of these capacities are likely going to be used anyway to produce this renewable hydrogen target on the other hand. If you look at clean heating technologies per se, there are almost no measures. And so what I mentioned before, for example, heat planning assessment, the first thing we should do, I mean, when my heating is off at home, I look around and I see what I have locally in my place to heat myself. And we are not doing this exercise at European level, which is crazy because there are significant available local heat sources. And I must add, in every single country, because that's the beauty also of heating and cooling networks, that their ability to cope with diverse sources, whether it is biomethane, whether it is geothermal or solar thermal, all of those resources are available and untapped. So no, the answer is no, and we would like to see much more support, in particular, I think, to finance the infrastructure. That is something that is not that well known, because, for example, we were discussing with colleagues from European institutions some time ago, and they told us, but we're financing heat pumps, we're developing heat pumps, so those heat pumps will go into the network, and voila, you're good to go. But there is a very big difference between the production and the underlying infrastructure. And for heating and cooling networks in particular, if we are going to develop and expand, if we are going to phase out individual heating solutions, boilers, and connect more and more households to our heating and cooling networks, we will need to grow them and modernize them and connect new buildings. And you don't build a total infrastructure like that just for 2 consumers. You need, it's a very high capex, so you need financing and you need planification. District approach to say this whole district is close to, I don't know what heat source, it's going to be converted to district heating. So we give the certainty to the heating and cooling utilities that their investments will have some kind of return.
Thanks very much for that, Aurélie. I am going to let you sit back and relax. I think we've got another question coming in from Diana, but I think we'll move on to Jaume. Thanks for that, Aurélie. Jaume, welcome this morning. Indeed, Jaume, you're the energy team leader in BEUC, the European Consumer Representative Organization. You've heard from Paula Pinho, you've heard from the district heating and cooling sector. I wonder how you are seeing whether or not you feel that we are doing enough to protect consumers, or whether you feel there are other things that should be done. But thanks very much for joining us this morning. The floor is yours. Thank you, Jaume.
Yeah, thanks, James, for the invitation. And let me start by, briefly thanking Eurogas for the cooperation and the other stakeholders for the cooperation with in the declaration that was mentioned already by Paula earlier this morning. So as you can understand, we're very happy that we were able to find common ground together with the industry in agreeing on measures that could protect consumers. And as a personal note, I want to say that I think that it is an unprecedented effort, and I think that the reason why we were able to do that is that differently from the past, we actually talked to each other. I think that we should talk to each other more. So I think it was a good exercise, and let's continue doing that. But rather than talking about the declaration, I want to talk about why the declaration was needed. And I will bring a very concrete example. I was talking a few months ago with one of our Italian members, an Italian consumer organization, and they were receiving, as you can understand, as prices increased, they were receiving a lot of calls from the members, so from consumers who were struggling in paying their energy bills, and they were trying to understand how they could basically pay for all their expenses and survive that month. And one of the stories that one of my members told me was very striking, I think, and it was about this woman from northern Italy, a primary school teacher in her 40s, and she's a single mom, and she saw her energy prices increase because her supplier, her electricity and gas supplier, sent a unilateral modification of the contract, and while she was paying 9 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity, at some point she started paying 45 cents per kilowatt hour. So energy component of her electricity price was multiplied by 5, and similarly the amount that she was paying for gas also increased. The thing is, she had subscribed the fixed term contract, so she had subscribed a contract which had a 3 years length with a price guaranteed at the moment of signing, and there was no review clause in the contract. Yet the price was increased because legislation in Italy and EU legislation allows unilateral price increases during the duration of the contract. And basically, although she did let's say, the responsible thing to some extent, so she was planning her finances, she agreed on a price that she could pay for. At some point, she started to see her bills increasing because simply the price that she was paying was unilaterally increased by the company, and the only thing that that she could do was searching on the market for different offers. But back in the spring, all offers available on the market were already very expensive. So this sort of protection, the free exit from the contract, was not really protecting her. And this happened in a context in which not only energy prices, but also food prices, also rent, also mobility prices increased. So it happens in the context of a cost of living crisis, as Paula rightly mentioned. So her energy bill, the increase of the energy bill was just yet another thing that was putting pressure on her budget. And she called, well, our Italian member to ask them, listen, what are my options? I mean, what can I do? Also considering that right now on the press, I'm reading very alarming stories saying that energy prices have increased everywhere, that I will soon be disconnected because I will not be able to pay, and disconnections have already started. So this is the reason why it was important to agree on that declaration. This is the reason why it's important now to go to the member states and to make sure that this declaration to protect consumers is implemented. It contains very good measures, as Paula mentioned, avoiding disconnections, avoiding unilateral price increases, allowing people to pay in installments, and providing consumers with additional information, with more information, or with clear information about their energy choices. We think that these are very good measures that are important, of course, for this short term. But some of them, we think that they should be extended and should become permanent. Example, unilateral price increases, as I mentioned before. I mean, right now, to our perspective, the legislation is unbalanced, because when what European legislation says is that suppliers are allowed to unilaterally change the price that consumers are paying, and the only thing that they need to do is to provide a notice of 30 days and allow consumers to exit the contracts for free. I mean, without paying a termination fee. I mean, here, to our perspective, what we need is stronger consumer protection. So what we need is that if consumers sign up for a contract with a price that is guaranteed for 3 years, and they decide to pay more to have this guarantee of a fixed price over the 3 years or 2 years or 1 year of the contract duration, this price should be guaranteed until the contract ends. And of course, I mean, when the contract ends and gets renewed, of course, the conditions might be different if conditions on wholesale markets change. But until the contract ends, the price should remain the same. These connections we welcomed in the context of the gas directive. The Internal Market Committee decided to propose for the following negotiations with the Council a ban on disconnections during winter times. We think that it's important to avoid disconnections as much as possible during winter, and to possibly to ban them, because it's as simple as that. I mean, if you disconnect a consumer from energy supply during winter, if that consumer is not able to heat their home, I mean, there is a risk that they might die. So, of course, it's important. I mean, we are not against disconnections to court, but we think that some protections during winter are important. And then if consumers decide not to pay and to be sort of irresponsible, of course, this could be or should be among the toolbox that suppliers could use to nudge consumers into paying for their energy bills. And the last point, and here I close, it's about clear information. We have evidence from our members, for example, from our Norwegian member, the Norwegian Consumer Council, that many consumers don't understand the information that they receive from their supplier at the moment at which they are signing up for a new contract. Our Norwegian member, every year they do a survey on consumers, asking them a very simple question: whether they know whether the price that they pay for electricity, whether their electricity contract foresees a fixed price or a variable price. And every year, half of the people say that they don't know whether they are on a fixed or on a variable price tariff. And an additional quarter, they give answers mentioning tariff structures that don't exist on the Norwegian market. So clear information is important to allow consumers to make informed choice and to avoid problems afterwards. So basically, to sum up, very important that we agreed on these strong measures to protect consumers among ourselves, consumer organizations, together with the industry. Important now that these measures are rolled out at the national level, and moving forward, we should think about making some of these measures permanent, such as avoid and banning unilateral price increases and during the duration of the contract, banning disconnections during winter times, and providing clear information to consumers. And I will stop here for the moment, and of course, happy to answer to any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Jaume. And I think we have to say we've enjoyed working with you, and indeed we should spend more time working together. I think that it's important, especially in this current crisis situation. Just a very brief follow-up, and you mentioned very clearly the situation in Italy, which of course has motivated you a lot. Do you hear other similar kind of stories that come across from Europe, or is it just more of? Did you see that more as an Italian issue? And I mean, obviously we've all read about it in the papers, or sorry, I'm being a bit older. In the media, we've all read about it in the media in the last few days. But is that more of a localized issue? Or have you heard other stories from across Europe through your other? I mean, you are present in all member states. Just briefly, because we are moving out of time, but I want to give you the chance just to expand a little bit on that point.
No, of course. We hear similar stories, I mean, from Greece, for example, or from Romania, from many countries in Eastern Europe. In some countries, consumers have been better protected. Spain, Portugal, because of some measures that were adopted by member states, consumers felt the hit a little bit less. In some other countries, like again Norway, or which I understand is not European Union, but still, we have members in Norway, and we represent them as well. We like them a lot as well. The impact was more limited, but and in France again the impact was more limited because of some government decisions. But there have been bad stories, let's say, or worry stories, not only in Europe but mostly in European and southern member states where less protections were adopted.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jaume, and thanks for the clarification as well. It is useful for us to understand the sense of that challenge and that issue. I will now move on to our last speaker. That is Malte Nyenhuis, who is the senior manager for European energy policy at BDEW, the German Energy and Water Industry Association. And he's also the chair of the Eurogas Retail Market Committee. Malte, we've heard from the different sectors, the European Commission. In some ways, one might say to you a kind of different question: are we also doing enough, not just to protect consumers, but also to protect the suppliers? We're very happy to hear your point of view over the next 5 minutes. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, James, and good morning from my side. Yes, and I mean, are we doing enough for suppliers? It's not the question of the event, but it's a fair point to ask. Yes, suppliers are of course also suffering in this crisis due to increased procurement cost due to the shortage of the Russian gas supplies mainly. So it's not comparable to the COVID situation, for example, where many consumers suffered. But for energy suppliers, it was quite a moderate crisis, let's say. I mean, there was decreased in demand, but it's not comparable to the current situation with many suppliers having to procure on a short-term basis for a very high amount, very high prices, gas to supply the consumers. But I wanted to starting off with what Paula has started to describe, and I think she really correctly and comprehensively described the situation, where we are, how it started in October last year, and where we are currently. And from the supplier's perspective, it is important to keep all three goals in mind. What we have to ensure for our consumers and our clients, it's affordability. And I think this is the main issue of today: security of supply and decarbonization. On security of supply, I think the key concept here is the protected customer, protected consumer concept, and the security of supply situation. I mean, luckily at the moment it looks like we will have not a big issue this winter. I mean, let's hope for the best and that temperatures will not stay like they are currently in Brussels, so that we manage to get through the winter thanks to all the preparation, the European emergency measures, national emergency measures, and the activities of the companies to fill the storages and so on. So, and let's hope for the best also for next winter. But I think this SOS regulation is key, and it's good that the member states have negotiated. I think the formal adoption hasn't happened yet, but it's soon. Hopefully, will happen soon, to increase also the solidarity measures between member states. The second point on decarbonization, I mean, I think it's clear currently, and the event focus on this winter, that gas is the source of choice, or the source for the heating of many consumers in Europe. For Germany, it's about 20 million consumers who are having a gas-based heating system. 10 million, roughly 10 million, having like a direct contract with their supplier. The rest having a contract via their landlord, or like in a multi-apartment housing. And I think it's also clear that gas, due to the structure, due to its let's say benefits, due to the structure, and the half of the heating in Germany is gas-based, roughly, that gas is let's say here to stay, or like molecules are here to stay for still a while. And this is why we have to speed up the rollout of renewable and decarbonized or low carbon gases. Therefore, Repower EU is a good initiative, a very good initiative, but also we need an enabling framework for this. So currently we are discussing the gas package. I mean, unbundling is one of the key issues, and also the discussion on local heat planning, and Aurélie alluded to that. It's key that we have like look what is best in each, let's say locality, which is best for each community, for each city, that they can decide how they want to go about when decarbonizing their heating based on the sources at hand in those in the national or in the regional circumstance. Then we have the delegated act, of course, on hydrogen and the additionality we are waiting for since quite a while. And what Eurogas is also promoting, targets for renewable and decarbonized gases, which are important to give a signal for investments, I think. And also on district heating and heating in general, we need all the sources. We need energy efficiency as a first measure. We need gas-based heating to be decarbonized. We need greening the district heating, which is currently largely still based on fossil fuels. We need heat pumps and so on. We need all the measures because the task is so enormous. And then let me turn to the biggest issue of today, the affordability and the protection of consumers. I mean, we have a quite extensive or comprehensive legal framework at European level and also in many member states. Of course, the implementation is an obvious. We need to implement it. We need to stick to the rules. This is just the first layer. And for gas, we need to mirror the electricity rules, which were updated in 2018, I think. So this is just the base layer. Based on that, at national level, we have a lot of support measures depending on the national traditions, national structures. In the social policy field, for example, in Germany, there's a housing allowance which covers the heating cost for households with a low income. And this, let's say, the scope or the threshold to be applicable for this housing allowance was just extended due to the crisis. And the bottleneck there is currently the administration, which is not capable of processing all the applications for this heating allowance. So this is rather an issue. That we have a lot of, let's say, crisis measures, short-term crisis measures at national level and also at European level, but we also need to implement them. And for example, again, what suppliers are doing is, or at best, trying to implement those measures as quick as they can. For example, in Germany, we had to have a long discussion on price breaks and the so-called price breaks for electricity and gas, which would mean that a certain amount, I think 80% of your traditional historic consumption will be, you will receive as a consumer for subsidized price, and the rest will be to market prices, just to keep still a certain price signal. There was a long political debate. It was finally, I think it was adopted in mid-November, and the first step is to waiver the monthly amount in December for all the consumers. So energy consumers have roughly about 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, they were anticipating the legislation coming, but still they had just a couple of weeks to implement this very complex measure for electricity and gas. And they managed to do so. So this is, I think, one part which we sometimes forget about, is that suppliers on one hand have this kind of financial pressure. They need to make sure that their business still that they can run their business in this crisis situation, given to the short-term procurement needed and the high prices, and on the other hand, implement the measures and all the crisis measures. And the third point for suppliers is that I think, as Jaume has said, that many consumers logically turn to consumer organizations to ask for advice and help. They do so also. They also ask the energy suppliers as well. So the amount of calls, the amount of inquiries of consumers to their supplier has increased dramatically. Suppliers have increased the staff, but they're still at their limits in their customer centers to try to reply to all these sometimes very dramatic asks. For example, in Leipzig, there was an example that someone called threatening to take his life because this person was so kind of scared or so in such a dramatic situation and not being able to pay the bill. So basically the supplier sent the police to the home just to ensure, but to ensure that everything is okay and this person is doing fine. And this is, just one very dramatic example, but we have to see both ends. So it's very stressful for consumers, but also it's quite a burden quite a challenging situation for suppliers and the staff. And what suppliers are doing, apart from the implementation of the crisis measures, also giving advice. One point is the price and tariff available. Try to find the best tariff in this difficult situation for consumers. Then, of course, financial problems are increasing. So the advice of how to try to pay the bill via payment plans, which suppliers have to offer in Germany to consumers in the duration of 6 to 18 months. So in this time, there are certain conditions to it, legally conditions, but they are offering payment plans. On top of that, many suppliers also have relief funds or are contributing to relief funds so that certain consumers who are in a very difficult financial situation can apply for additional funds. And on energy savings, there are lots of campaigns. In Germany, there has been a public campaign by the government, I think in June or July. We as BDEW just started a couple of weeks ago a new campaign, in particular focusing on this winter and the let's say possibilities how to drive down your energy consumption with kind of simple means. And these sort of things is what I think consumers, suppliers are doing, and also what the joint declaration is about, that we could try to go the extra mile as far as we can and try to support consumers wherever we can, depending on the circumstances in member states and in the regions. And for example, in Germany, time is running out, I see. Yes, I just wanted to clarify the point on fixed prices which Jaume made. I think it's obvious that if we have a fixed price contract in Germany, for example, it's usually 12 months. You have a fixed price. The energy component is fixed, and you cannot just unilaterally change it. That would be a breach of contract, breach of law. What suppliers can do is they can increase the price if you don't have this fixation of the price, the energy component, but still you need to justify it. So even with the current crisis measures, suppliers can allow if, for example, the procurement costs have risen and they are justified. So it's not that they just out of the blue can increase the price. This is just the last point I wanted to make, given that my time is running out, I guess.
No, that's fair enough, Martin. I really appreciate the input that you've given there. There were a lot of things that you need to clarify upon. So thank you for that. I think it is important that we do consider that, this relationship between suppliers and consumers is entirely symbiotic. We don't really want to end up in a situation of disconnection as a representative of failure. So we do have to find the right way to make sure that we're able to work for both sides, to keep both sides moving forward. I'd like to invite all of the panelists come back now. I'm not going to ask you a direct question from me, actually, Malte, but I'm going to ask you to answer the question from Melissa Zill, and I will also ask this one to you as well, Aurélie, because it's a question about justifying promoting decarbonized gas when electric heating through heat pumps is way more efficient. Malte, how do you see that?
I already said it depends. Heat pumps are definitely part of the solution. I'm not saying that the gas boilers, we will keep the same number of gas boilers we have today. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need heat pumps. But for heat pumps to be efficient, you need also to, and I think is what Aurélie said, you need to insulate your home. You need, and then the building envelope needs to be up to date, let's say. So if you just put a heat pump in an old house, it will not really be efficient as it's on paper.
Yeah, thanks for that, Malte. And Aurélie, there is a lot of talk as well about, I mean, at the moment, there's a lot of natural gas and other fossil fuels used in district heating. There's a lot of talk about the potential for electrification. How are you seeing it? I know there's also talk about using decarbonized gas in district heating. What's your view on that point from Melissa Zill?
Yes. So I would really echo what Malte said. I think it is time to stop at European level, just kind of seeing the transition through answers that are a bit too Manichaean. The transition is not simple. The challenge is huge, and there will be a variety of solutions. I think there are 3 pillars to decarbonizing our building. The first one is energy efficiency. The second one will be developing heat pump. The third one will be developing green heating and cooling networks, which will rely on a variety of technology, which includes heat pumps at large scale, but also decarbonized gas, where it's circular and sustainable to use, geothermal, solar thermal, and a variety of elements. And the reasons for that are really simple. You cannot put a residential heat pump in every building. That's just a matter of fact. So how do we address this for buildings where it's not suitable? For example, in densely populated area, the IEA, the European Commission, the ARENA, every serious international body is acknowledging that for densely populated areas, heat pumps are not the one single solution, and in particular, heating and cooling networks are extremely relevant. For buildings, condominium, multi-apartments as well here, there is really a value to look into heating and cooling networks, which can use renewable electricity as much as possible through heat pump to harvest geothermal, solar thermal, ambient heat, etc., but which will also use local biogases where it is developed and where it is locally sourced. And I think what matters at the end of the day is the consumer. I will just finish with one last thing. I think it is dangerous today to see everything through the prism of electricity only. It is great to develop solar and wind much more. Clean electricity is increasing at a fast pace, but we should also learn from the lessons we see in other countries like Norway or Sweden, which have been pioneers in electrification, which have the highest rates of EVs in Europe. And in Norway, which used to be a net electricity exporter to Europe, they are facing a power deficit as of 2026 because their system and the increasing consumption they have just cannot cope with the way the production is increasing. So for EVs, I would really say it bluntly, renewable electricity will be probably the best way. But the thing is that for heating, you can also heat it sustainably and efficiently with other sources that will complement electricity. And I don't think we have the means to disregard those solutions today.
Thank you very much, Aurélie. Jaume, you will get the last word on this question, please.
Well, I have to say that as consumer organization, unfortunately, we always have a nuanced view, and it's true that there is no silver bullet to decarbonize heating. I mean, you have in densely populated areas, of course, district heating will play a role. There are still some problems on when it comes to district heating, when it comes to consumer protections. Some countries do better than others. Of course, Denmark is a great example of things that where of a country where things are going well. But of course, I mean, as consumer organizations, I mean, as BEUC and national consumer organizations, we're all for promoting district heating in where it makes sense, where it's most cost efficient. But at the same time, to our perspective, improving consumer rights is important to increase consumer acceptance of the energy transition, because you don't want to have a situation where lots of people are forced to switch to energy carrier while they have absolutely no protections or they have very little protections. So yeah, I mean, again, in those areas where a district heating makes sense and is most cost efficient, to our perspective, it should be rolled out. I mean, it's a no-brainer. And what you mentioned before, really, about heat planning, I mean, that is key. We know that today we have 80% of people who are heating their homes with fossil fuels. This needs to change in the next couple of decades, and it's a massive change. So we really need some planning. We really need to make it in an orderly manner to make sure that the best possible decisions for consumers and for the energy system and for citizens and for the environment are made. So this requires a lot of planning. But then, of course, in rural areas or in those areas which are not very densely inhabited, you are going to need electrification. You are going to need more heat pumps, and again. There is no silver bullet in the sense that I think that every urban areas are not the same as rural areas. Malta is not the same as Norway or as Sweden, so local approaches will be needed. What's important is to before rolling out, basically heat decarbonization, to sit back, understand what are the best options, develop heat planning, and then choose those options that are most cost effective for consumers.
Thank you very much, Jaume. And yes, Aurélie, please.
Yes, can I just say very quickly that Jaume, I just want to tell you that we fully agree on the need to strengthen transparency and consumer protection. And this is an area that our industry has already decided to work on. And it's very clear what you say. In the Netherlands, for example, they decided to ban individual heating solution and push heat pumps or district heating. But it's true that for heating and cooling network, they were asking themselves this question. I mean, how can you give trust to the consumer? You don't just tell them, okay, connect to this heating network that is operated by this company and voila. So on the one hand, in Netherlands, they choose to partially renationalize it. I'm not saying it's good or it's bad. I think in our industry, there are mixed views. But the point is that there are ways indeed to ensure that we can do that while having price transparency, consumer protection, and decarbonization guarantees. And it relates to one question in the chat that has not been really answered. There are many things that can be done also to provide decarbonization guarantees. I think what is missing for our sector is the heating clean energy package, because the electricity sector did not, decarbonize, enhance its consumer transparency, etc., out of nothing. There were incentives, there was support, very strong political ambition, and we would like to have the same. And we are ready also to make a step in the consumer direction for this.
Thank you for that, Aurélie. And I think it's good that you mentioned the Netherlands there at the end, because I was just about to say that in the end, I tend to agree with the point of view that we will need lots of different solutions for heating, depending on local circumstances, depending on the building stock, and depending what is sustainable and that is available. And the Netherlands, of course, as you know, did push down a specific direction, has since recognized the need that they want to have 20% of biomethane by 2030 in their heating mix in particular, and it's also moved in the direction of hybrid heat pumps now as a solution. So I do think that indeed we can say that it is important that consumers, suppliers, technology providers, all of the different heating solutions are brought together to find the right way for us to be able to find the sustainable mechanism to achieve the energy transition in heating. We are in a situation of crisis, and we are indeed dealing with unprecedented aggression by Russia, which has, of course, impacted quite heavily consumers. And a lot of action has been done over the last year, and I suspect we will still see some action coming in the coming year. Nevertheless, I think as long as we work together, working together with Jaume, with Malte, Aurélie, you mentioned the guidelines. You are also very welcome, I'm sure, from the European Commission if you wish to sign up to them. Other people have. This is something that would, I'm sure, also make Jaume happy. He's nodding. So in essence, that's very much open for you to join that group. We will work together, and I think it is important that when we consider the needs of consumers and the increasing amount of consumers that face difficulty with energy bills, that we do need to find the right solutions in a symbiotic way to make sure suppliers and consumers are both protected. My great thanks to you, Aurélie, Jaume, Malte. It's been really good to have you with us today. Of course, my thanks also to Paula, who set the scene. It has been a very good discussion upon which to end our series of Let's Meets for this year. So we can consider the consumers very much in our eyes before we head off into the Christmas break. And all that remains for me to say thank you very much to the audience, and thank you very much to my team who organised these and are extremely well oiled and running this particularly well. So my great thanks to them. And I would say this, I really do look forward to seeing you all again next year, where we'll have more Let's Meets. We will discuss the issues of the day. And indeed, I will only finally say, I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a happy holidays, and look forward to continue working together on these great challenges that we face in the energy sector. Thank you very much. Have a very good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Merry Christmas.